This is your host, Terry Mills of View from Military Mind. I'd like to welcome you today, and we have a special episode just for you from Dustoff Diaries. This is the podcast we got our start with. So why don't you sit back, enjoy the show. It comes from February of 2018. It is episode 1, series 1, and gives you the story of Dustoff and the men and women who got it started. Especially dedicated to the current men and women who are involved in Army Medevac or aeromedical evacuation, called Dustoff. Also, a special announcement note for all of you Military Mind listeners: we now have a Patreon account. Please join us and be a Patreon supporter and help you from Military Mind continue to deliver to you the news and views the men and women who have defended and will defend your freedoms. Go to our Facebook page or to our website. Facebook page is View from Military Mind. Our webpage is viewfrommilitarymind.com, and click on the Patreon button and become a supporter of viewfrommilitarymind.com. And we can continue to bring you the stories and episodes you would like to hear. So without further ado, here's Dustoff Diaries in February 2018. Good morning, and welcome to Dustoff Diaries. This is going to be our first episode. I want to welcome everybody that showed up, everybody that responded to Messenger. I'm glad you could be here this morning. And as you'll see, we're slow but surely working through here. Today, we'll start bringing you the stories of Dustoff yesterday and today, straight from the men and women that are involved in Dustoff. We'll give you a little bit of the history of Dustoff, how it started and how it occurred. In today's episode, we're going to cover the beginnings of Dustoff, or Medevac as it's called, aeromedical evacuation. I'll spit it out. It's Sunday. It's been a long week. From World War I until today. People don't realize just how long ago this actually started. People start trying to do aeromedical evacuation. Of course, the idea of medical evacuation started back in the Civil War, and we'll get into the histories of that and the different things that occurred. In the second segment, we'll review some of the more relevant books that are available today. We've got out there. I've met some of the authors. I'm proud to call them brothers and sisters. And we'll look at at least 3 of the books today that I've read and that I've highly recommend for those who want to know something about Dustoff and what we do. To read those, and we'll get in those at that time. And then we'll look at some of today's operations and the things that are going around with those, how things have advanced and what kind of equipment we're using today. Maybe we'll get lucky in today. Some of the guys that I've worked with, some of the guys that I know, some of them that are on here just watching will kind of chime in, put in some notes and messages. You can go on the Messenger. I'll take a look at it, see what we've got. Answer your questions if you have any. But for the time being, let's make a couple little plugs here. Some of the groups that I support, of course, the Dustoff Association. I highly recommend those who've been involved in Dustoff to go to dustoff.org and join up that group. Dustoff Association is made for all those who've been involved in Dustoff or have been associated in some way with Dustoff, either as an air crew, a pilot, crew chief, medic, something of that nature. A little plug for a good friend of mine, Eric Savastan, for RTAG, Rotor Airline Group. You pilots out there and you mechanics out there that work on these big windmills that we fly around in, if you're looking to get out and move on, but want to stay within aviation, look at the RTAG Group Facebook page and get a hold of Eric and move your career on to commercial aviation. So that being said, little spots and little plugs there. Hope you guys appreciate it. Let me know. I can use all the help I can get. First thing we're come up into, like I said earlier in our first segment. Sorry about all the switching back and forth here and not looking directly at the camera all the time. I'm still trying to get set up, used to the setup and how things are going to do. So bear with me today, and we'll get through this and make the show better as we go along. Like I said, we're going to get into the actual, a little bit of the history of paramedical evacuation. Excuse me. A lot of people have been confused over the term medevac. Not too long ago, and I don't want to take anything away from the PJs, but they had a show on TV called Medevac. And I'm sorry. Been there, done that. That's not medevac, that's CASVAC. There's been a lot of conversations and debates over the use of the word medevac or aeromedical evacuation and how it is used, and CASVAC and Dustoff. Well, everybody knows Dustoff is Army, period. Dustoff. That's what we are. We go in there in the hot zones or where somebody had their worst day of their life in a combat situation, we bring them out. That's our name. Medevac's been kind of tossed around. We'll get a little bit about that too, as to where they came up. A little disparity on the name as to why they did that. Now, aeromedical evacuation operations, as we know them today, in their very basic form, have been performed since Korea and Vietnam. Been in an exceptional manner. They've been executed. The medical personnel, the hospital, all the things that were going around. We've done patient and casualty evacuation from the Civil War all the way through Spanish-American War, World War II, World War I, in some way or another, either by wheel or by stretcher. Then come World War I, we had our first aeromedical evacuation in an airplane. Wow. Put it into the fuselage, brought them out of there, and voila, we had our first aeromedical evacuation. Let's go back a little bit back to, excuse me, into the Civil War. They were talking about in the first years of the war, medical ambulances were in short supply. And 3 days after the first Battle of Bull Run, in July 1861, there's some 3,000 wounded men still laying on the battlefield. So I had to come up with some way to get these folks out of there. They were setting up beds in the halls of Congress. So it was really a strain. So a few people identified a desperate need for improving their casualty care and evacuation. So the director of the Army of the Potomac back then, the medical director, Jonathan Letterman, he started developing a system of evacuating patients and casualties from the front line. He called for a develop of ambulance companies and permanently detailed soldiers. Now, these are all the basis of medevac. They finally pushed through what they call the Letterman's Plan, or the Letterman's Plan into law on 11 March of 1864. And it was tested, Battle of Antietam, which employed field stations, ambulances, a whole bunch. Again, it established what we call a chain of evacuation. Now, there's a lot of in-depth history on that. They're not going to get in too deep on it. Now, we move on forward to World War I. The first motorized ambulances had come in and replaced the horse and mule-drawn wagons of the early wars. We had our evacuation. Here we talk, the first evacuation of wounded military personnel by an airplane occurred during World War I at Flanders in France on the 18th of April 1918. French medical officer had drawn up plans for the modification of 2 French planes, and he supervised those modifications with enough space for 200 soldiers behind the cockpit. They were inserted through the side of the fuselage and evacuated out to the next closest hospital. And it was used, for a minor extent through World War I. They kept developing and developing and developing. The first one aeromedical or air ambulance in the United States was in 1918, where they converted a biplane so a standard Army stretcher would fit into the rear area of the aircraft. So we've come a long way, and they kept building up, getting better, providing better care and better aeromedical evacuation. World War II come along. A lot of your military authorities still believe that air evacuation of parents was not only dangerous, but was also medically unsound and militarily impossible. It took a lot of push from a lot of people to start saying, hey, this is something we can do, both in airplanes and, of course, helicopters hadn't been invented yet. So General David Grant, he was the first air surgeon in the Army Air Forces, proposed air evacuation service. And he was met with such opposition, but he continued to push. And finally, in June of 1942, he got his air evacuation system. The first one the first major evacuation took place in New Guinea in August of 1942. They evacuated more than 13,000 patients over 700 miles to Australia, a period of 7 days, because there was a counteroffensive going on in that area. So as we see, we're starting to get, still got a lot of pushback. A lot of people didn't really want to see this happen. They didn't think it would happen. They thought it was dangerous. So there was a lot of fighting going on. And as we get into the history later on into Vietnam, we'll discuss that more. We'll see how much those gentlemen had some issues as far as even having their helicopters taken from them. And they couldn't hang on to them. But by 1943, the Army Air Evacuation Service has moved a lot of wounded soldiers by air transport. Just in 1943 alone, they had 173,000 casualties were evacuated back to the United States by air. Another 500,000 in 1944 and 1945, another 4,500 or 4,500. 454,000. I'll spit it out. I get ahead of myself here. It's crazy. Over a 3-year period, well over 1 million patients were evacuated. They proved that the new air evacuation doctrine, it showed that air medical evacuation was a great new alternative. And of course, we had a great key leader who helped us with that. It was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander. And admittedly, the president when I was born. That's scary. We evacuated everybody from the Fort hospitals by air, and it was unquestionably saved hundreds and thousands of lives. Saw our first use of the helicopter at this time too. Sikorsky had the R6, and in November of 1943, they made their first evaluation test flight in the R6. Carried one pilot, one medical attendant, and 2 simulated litter patients, and they were attached to the outside of the helicopter to facilitate loading and unloading. Excuse me. Like we see in the MASH movies, the patient could be seen by the pilot and attendant during flight. In April 1944, we had our first actual U.S. Army helicopter medical evacuation rescue, and took place. The pilot was Lieutenant Carter Harmon. He rescued casualties from stranded forces about 25 kilometers west of Malu, Burma. So now we see our first helicopter rescue. It's showing that it's not such a bad idea. It's something that we can do. And of course, air evacuation of military patients continued after the end of World War II. 1949, Secretary of Defense directed evacuation of all sick and wounded in peace and war be accomplished by air as a method of choice. Hospital ships and other means would only be used in unusual circumstances. And so the era of aeromedical evacuation had finally come out of the dark side, or the dark ages, and was starting to be pushed forward. So as we go along, of course, we get into the Korean War, and a lot of us have seen MASH and all the different Korean war things on all the different war movies, and seen how they evacuated it at that time. Of course, we had the little bubble helicopters with the pods on the outside, and that's how they started moving those around in Korea. Excuse me. It's one of those rough days. What do you think, y'all think so far? What kind of, y'all have any questions or anything of that nature? Feel free to, send them on to me. Let me know what's going on. There's something particular you want to know or something to go back to, we can definitely do that. Anyway, get into the aeromedical evacuation organization structures during Korea. The Army Aeromedical Evacuation, or medevac as it became known, was created and developed by soldiers and officers in Korea, such as the 8th Army, with very little backing from the Army Medical Service. They didn't really want to back it. Till the concept itself started proving itself. The Surgeon General recognized the need to create the medevac structure in the Army Medical Service and to staff the medevac units with true medical aviators, rather than pilots just borrowed willy-nilly from wherever they get to. And even today we see that sometimes we'll borrow a pilot that is not medevac or Dustoff trained, come in there. He may be assault. And it's not taking anything from those guys. I mean, they're good pilots. They're good at what they do. But medevac is a culture that you really have to be. You have to give yourself all into it. You have to be part of it. It's not that you won't be effective. You just won't be as good. But yeah, they started to get to the doctrine where they started getting medical aviators, getting specially trained medics. Even back in Korea, they started looking, specially trained medics. They didn't push it too hard, but they did try to get into it. And this is the time too that the helicopters that they would become de facto Army Medical Service members and actually transfer to the Medical Service Corps, which we still do that today. But for a long while, we still didn't have true Medical Service Corps pilots until after 1953 armistice. So we're starting to see the development of the medevac system here, starting to make it look like what we've got today. We've all seen the stories on TV about all the heroics that they put in there. In the Korean War, Air Force units actually provided the first rotary wing CASEVAC, not aeromedical evacuation. It was CASEVAC, even though the term aeromedical evacuation was used out of context throughout the war, describing the Air Force rotary wing casualty evacuation. It was CASEVAC, not aeromedical. It was grabbing several guys that were wounded, putting them on a helicopter, getting them out, no medical treatment en route. Or if it was very minimal. It's only what the guy could do reaching out the door onto a litter that had a cover on it, or what they did prior to putting that guy on that aircraft. So that was CASEVAC. That was not aeromedical. And we talked about that early on. That I was talking about the misnomer or the disparity in there. Even today, a lot of times now, granted PJs are medically trained, but the level of care that's developed or that is delivered while they're on, say, one of the CSAR birds is CASEVAC. It's not a true aeromedical evacuation. But yeah, as they go through, they start developing. The Air Force developed dedicated aircraft to CASEVAC since there's very little air opposition in Korea. The Army started building up their medevac mission, aeromedical evacuation. Demonstrated all the different things they could do. They had a demonstration over there that showed how things can be done, and they started bringing medevac up. But, I see that Heidi, I thank you for joining, Katrina and Carol. That's great. You got those folks all on board. Hopefully there's quite a few others. Get a chance to just give me a wave, give me a hi, let me know you're out there. Invite everybody, go ahead and bring yourselves on. Just send me a note. Tell me what you want to hear. What you know about. So, give me a few minutes here and we'll keep on going. So we're talking about the history of medevac, just touching real light on some of the things. I'm not trying to get in deep with them. I could go for hours on this, just giving you some kind of a history, the things, and the heartaches that they went through, the episodes at K-16 outside of Seoul with their helicopter detachment, 8063rd MASH that was over there in the 4th helicopter detachment. Just all kinds of things that went on over there. And I encourage you to get out there and read about the history of medevac, especially if you're in the military. I got to get this hat off. There we go. Keep running into the microphone, making all kinds of noise. Everybody's probably going, what in the world? But yeah, we can get into a lot of different things. The advent of the first helicopters that were brought in, which were H-13s, both from Bell and Hiller. And we had Bell 13s and the Hiller H-23s. Had exterior pods out them for litter casualties. One ambulatory casualty could be carried inside the cockpit if required. But those are all histories under their own, and it's a very great thing that we developed over time. Of course, then we come into to Vietnam. That's where medevac really started coming into its own. We've heard the horror stories over there of what's going on or what happened over there. Now, of course, everybody's heard about the 57th Aeromedical. Those who haven't, 57th Aeromedical was your original, full-on, fully established medevac unit. Developed, kind of built and grown by Major Charles Kelly, who unfortunately lost his life in Vietnam doing what he loved in aeromedical evacuation. He brought us today the saying of medevac: until we have your wounded. He helped establish and develop those systems we have in place today for medevac and for Dustoff. It's where the call sign Dustoff came from. It was actually in 1967 where they came up with it. Still not quite sure. Nobody really knows how that came about. Some of them says it's, when the aircraft comes in, it blows the dust off, the dust off of the wounded, or blows the dust off the landing zone. Or there's all kinds of stories out there. You guys figure out for yourself where it happened to come from. I'm not sure, and I'm not going to get into that debate. But that is our call sign to this day. And one of those proud call signs that I don't think we'll ever go away. But as we look back at the different wars, World War II, very few tactical aircraft used to evacuate. In Korea, about 1 out of every 7 U.S. casualties was evacuated by helicopter. And as a result, the died of wounds rate dropped 2.5%. Well, during Vietnam, the actual rate dropped even further due to the evacuation. Majority of U.S. casualties from front lines by Army Dustoff helicopters. While the Air Force Military Airlift Command evacuated the seriously wounded from theater by strategic fixed wing back to the U.S. So the Army and the Air Force have worked together extensively in the aeromedical evacuation system, and they are part of it. So please don't ever misunderstand me that they don't have anything to do with it. They do. They're part of that system. Just Dustoff and the initiation of aeromedical evacuation begins with the Army taking them off the field. Of course, we know that the location of Vietnam in relation to the U.S. during that time created some problems. It's halfway around the world. So we had to develop this kind of system between the Army and the Air Force, getting them off the battlefield, getting them back into the hospitals, and getting them back to the U.S. Through strategic fixed-wing airlift. It was very difficult over there in Vietnam with the waterways, the jungles, lack of infrastructure. So the helicopter came into its own. We started showing how we could use hoist operations off the Hueys. Use the Huey aircraft for the first time. Outstanding airframe. Had plenty of power to do what we had to do. Excuse me. And use the hoist, like I just said. And had this little thing hanging off the end of it called a jungle penetrator. Actually had 3 seats. You fold those out, and you bring people up on that little piece of cable into the aircraft and get them on their way to get them on their way to medical treatment. These were the new things that were being developed over there. Had the trains in the mountains, we had the deserts, we had the rivers, we had the jungles. We had a vast opportunity to try different things over there because of the particular train that was in Vietnam. This is a big part of our history. It became a routine part of the Army Medical Department's evacuation system in Vietnam. And again, it was referred to as Dustoff, and it was adopted in 1963. So then the medical corps just started commissioning officer and warrant officer pilots to utilize this call sign. Enlisted members of the Dustoff crews were heirs to the Letterman legacy that we mentioned back from Civil War. Their measure of devotion that can be gleaned from the statistics. The medical department lost 199 helicopters in Vietnam. 1/3 of the 1,400 Dustoff pilots were killed or wounded. And one of our folks that we talked about and threw a little plug out there, the Dustoff Association, has recorded 90 commissioned and warrant officers killed in Vietnam. Another 380 pilots were wounded or injured as a result of hostile fire crashes. So that's a lot of medevac pilots taking a hit. Casualties among crew chiefs and flight medics included 121 killed and 545 wounded or injured. So we put ourselves out there to bring these folks home, and we do suffer. We do suffer. We transported nearly 1 million military and civilian casualties during Vietnam. The success of the helicopters was largely attributed to actual helicopters design and the flight crews. The aircraft were outstanding. The flight crews were dedicated, unhesitating to get in there and get our wounded men and women out. It had major changes in the Army Rotary Wing. Aeromedical evacuation of battlefield casualties, and its organizational structure changed. While some of the Dustoff helicopters that saw service in Korea were used initially over in Vietnam, then they started bringing in the Huey. So you have to excuse me, I get off on track on sometimes. The larger helicopters were a greater improvement over the predecessors. They carried more. You could put up to 6 inside of those helicopters, strategically placed, right? They were inside versus being outside on the original H-13s and H-23s. We could actually work on them and provide actual care inside, have a medic on board to provide that care. I had a longer range on them. They had radios and stuff, inside lighting. These are things we didn't have on the H-13 and H-23s in Korea. Like I said, we were talking about the UH-1, the Huey. It greatly enhanced or made better the battlefield mortality rate. It reduced the loss of people en route and loss of soldiers overall. Then they started bringing the Dustoff helicopters closer to the tactical front lines than ever before. We can get up there, be within 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes to get out there. They start practicing the golden hour. 20, 30 minutes out, 20, 30 minutes back. Get them to a hospital, get them into treatment before that golden hour was over with. Of course, with the advent of having radios on the aircraft, we'd call into the Dustoff or call into the caches and the mashes and whatever the medical hospital was called at that time in those forward areas. And we'd call in and say what kind of patient condition we have, how many patients we had on board. Those hospitals could set up and be ready to bring those, accept those patients in there. The medics were starting to get better trained, not just the common first aid that most of them done, the soldiers' first aid, but that now they were into more advanced medical. They could start giving, IVs and fluids and things like that to some extent. They're still pretty medieval by today's standards, but they still accomplished a lot, and they were the beginning of it. Of course, the first helicopter unit sent to Vietnam was the 57th Medical Detachment Helicopter Ambulance, later nicknamed the Originals. This would not be the only. This would not only be the first medical detachment, but also first aviation unit deployed with the UH-1 helicopter in Vietnam. The detachment was authorized by TONE, which that's their equipment listing, to have 5 UH-1 helicopters. The organization consisted of 2 sections. Pilot commissioned officer section of 7 that included the commander, maintenance officer, and ops officer. And section 2 is the enlisted soldier section of 21 that included your mechanics, your medics, flight operations, and supply. Usually utilized a crew of 4, and your aircraft commander, your co-pilot, medic, and crew chief. They took care. The crew chiefs took care of the aircraft, the maintenance, basically in charge of it, making sure it was ready to fly and go. The pilots would fly it, and the medic would take care of the patients in the back. And to this day, actually, the medic's in charge of the aircraft and what it needs to do once that patient is on board. The crew chief's going to protect the aircraft and, like I said, maintain the maintenance on the aircraft. Sometimes crew chiefs left behind to allow for additional space for the casualties. We try not to do that anymore because we fly a two-ship system. And medics have been known to be left on the ground to take care of patients, especially when they're getting hot. They flew from the early model A model Hueys all the way up to the new UH-1Is, which I have never seen one, but used to be able to carry a lot more pilots or a lot more patients and stuff in those. Standard doctrinal employment of detachment changed a little from the Korean War. Two helicopters were stationed at one point, and as the fighting escalated, they changed the helicopters' locations in order to improve the response time and increase the number of aircraft. They had a lot of battles went on during that time. As some of us that know the history of medevac, Major Kelly was always fighting to keep his aircraft. Commander didn't know what to do with him if he wasn't really busy, so they'd try to steal his aircraft. And it took them some time to get them to realize, look, these aircraft are dedicated. They can't be used to move your troops around everywhere. You can't have the Red Cross on them. A whole bunch of different fights, and Major Kelly was a staunch supporter. He would stand like a little bulldog, keep him from taking his equipment, his personnel, and his aircraft. And he made 5 helicopters at one time. It was just 5 helicopters over the whole country. And they made it work. And they started getting more and more as the years went on while they were over there. Back on with it. We'll get into some of the books that I was talking about earlier. I love to read, and I think everybody ought to take that time to read. The first book I'll get into, called Bones 1-0. Everybody can see that there. That's by Reuben Doc Ryan. He's a medic that was in Iraq and served over there. This is a story about medevac in Iraq, which is one of our most current, or was one of our most current engagements. He was assigned to the Big Red 1. He was originally a Navy SEAL and got out, come into the Army, went to the 75th Ranger Battalion as a medic, and then got into medevac and worked as a Army medevac flight medic. There we go. I'll get the words right. But it's Bones 1-0, Racing the Reaper in Iraq. Very interesting book, in-depth detail about what he as a medic did there. So you can see the book. A little plug there for Doc Ryan. There's several books out there by medics. I encourage you to go through and find them. Come on the Dustoff Diary Facebook page and let me know what one that you like to read, what ones you have read, so we know, what people are looking at out there. I don't see everything every day. I don't always get a chance to go to Books A Million. I don't get a chance to get on the Amazon books all the time. For those of you who know me out there, you know that I'm currently active with the National Guard and getting ready to deploy one more time in medevac. So I don't always have that opportunity to get out there and find the things I want to look at. Yes, Teresa, you did miss a little bit, but not too much. The test segment was a test segment. I'll try to answer some of these questions on here on the messenger. But the first part you missed was the history. No problem. I think you got most of it, though, when you came on. All right, going on to our second book. This one, I've had the privilege and honor to meet this gentleman, General Patrick Henry Brady. As I said earlier, he served under Major Charles Kelly in Vietnam, the 57th, the originals. This is about the 57th during the Vietnam War. They themselves, in a 10-month period, rescued 21,000 wounded, both enemy and friendly, and received 26 Purple Hearts in a 10-month period. That's insane. That's nuts. It shows you the level of commitment these men had to dust off and to getting their brothers and sisters home after being wounded on the battlefield. And a lot of folks don't realize, yes, back then, even then, we had women that were wounded and injured in the field. So, you'll hear me say constantly, our men and women on the battlefield. There's always been both on the battlefield. All of them both had to be rescued. Like I said, this is Dead Men Flying by General Patrick Henry Brady. There's that book. Pretty cool. This is a signed copy. Let's see if I can get my fingers out of the way so you can read what it says. There we go. Victory in Vietnam. Awesome gentleman to speak to. He is a Medal of Honor recipient, Silver Star, several different valorous awards, Purple Heart, of course. Awesome man to talk to. You can sit for hours talking to him about his mission in Vietnam and what his thoughts about medevac today are. And in fact, our next episode, hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to General Brady, and we're going to get in a little bit about the decline of medevac. So we'll see how things go there, see what he has to say about that. And hopefully we'll get him on here and see what he says, get his input. There's a little picture of him in Vietnam with some of his guys with the 57th. Some of them doing what they're doing. Like I said, this gets into their struggles to meet their standards or to meet Major Kelly's standards, because he had a very high standard for their guys to meet. This is lesson learned. All their lessons learned by General Brady over there. Again, talking about struggling to meet their standards. And the book Dead Men Flying, it's a story of the salvation in the midst of horror and courage in the face of adversity. This covers all the stuff that they did over there and talks in depth about the men that we call the originals, 57th Medical Detachment in Vietnam. So, good book, awesome book. If you ever get a chance, those of you who are members of Quad A, Army Aviation Association of America, you get a chance to go up there. General Brady's always up there, has his book and some of the others he's written. I encourage you, whether you're medevac or not, go up there, meet the man, speak to him. He's more than willing and very forthcoming about how he feels about today's medevac and how we've got some issues we still need to iron through. The third book I'll take a look at real quick. Like I said, these are very brief. I'm not getting in depth about the books. But the third one, this gentleman here, we've become good friends over long distance. And it's Dustoff 7-3, written by Eric Sabiston. Just currently got out of the military as a W3, and is saving lives under fire in Afghanistan. He actually had the seventh female, if I remember correctly, and I will correct that if I'm wrong, to earn the Silver Star. He had a medic. She did several rescues, hoist, and things of that nature with an injured back. And she went ahead and did them over a long period of time. So, if I remember correctly, a few days. And we'll get into her story because that's a very particular story. And we'll have that one day. We'll get into it and talk about what she did over there. Being injured, grievously injured. She's still with us today. But again, this is Dustoff 7-3, Saving Lives Under Fire in Afghanistan by Eric Sabiston. He's also the CEO of RTAG, Rotor Airline Group, helping move our pilots and mechanics into the civilian side of things. Talked about the four unlikely heroes in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, that were just thrown together. Medics were forced to descend on wires and reach wounded, and pilots fighting wind and weather. And the crew chiefs controlling those hoists. It gets into the concept of evacuating wounded soldiers by helicopters. What we do today to make that happen. But yes, Dustoff 7-3. Those three books, Dustoff 7-3, Dead Men Flying by General Brady, and Bones 1-0 by Doc Ryan. I highly recommend those three. And with each episode, we'll get into more of those to see what they look like and ones that we can recommend. Again, I highly encourage everybody just kind of write to me. Let me know what you think of what you want to see me do. How do I need to improve it? This is a new thing for me. I'm not the world's expert at doing these things. It's been a long time since I've been involved in any kind of programs or recording or things of that nature. For you folks out there that's seen me in front of cameras and things like, you see I got my teeth in. That's a closed joke. Some of the guys out there know about that. But we'll get into those stories. That's from my time in Afghanistan the first time with Dustoff. We'll get into those. But for now, it's pretty much what I have. I've been on here for 48 minutes, longer than I expected to be. We usually try to keep these 30 to 45 minute long, so you're not totally bored out of your life. But up until we meet again, hopefully next weekend, I will keep everybody posted as to what we're doing. And by all means, send me any suggestions. If you'd like to be on the show and be one of my guests and be interviewed, talk about what you did over there, by all means, send me an email at dustoffdiaries2018@gmail.com or contact me through Messenger here at Dustoff Diaries on Facebook. I'd really love to hear from y'all. I'd love to hear from my fellow Dustoffers out there across the country. Let me know what you got going on. I encourage you to join the Dustoff Association and to get with that brotherhood and sisterhood there to further our goals and to keep our story and our history alive. It's something that's very honorable, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But for Dustoff Diaries and for the men and women who have been Dustoff and who aren't Dustoff now, thank you. Good luck. Have a good day. And we'll see y'all soon.
Been a Valkyrie Productions podcast, copyright 2020, with your host, Terry Mills. Thank you for listening to our show, and we will see you on the next one. God bless, and have a good day.